It was a quiet evening in the small town of Maple Springs. The sun had just set, painting the sky with colors of soft orange and fading purple. In a little house on the corner of Willow Street sat a man named David Miller, holding an old photo frame in his hands. The picture showed a younger version of him, standing beside a smiling little girl with ribbons in her hair. Her name was Emily, his only daughter, his pride, his heart. David stared at the picture for a long time, his rough fingers brushing over the glass as a tear silently rolled down his cheek. The laughter in the photo felt like it belonged to another lifetime. He whispered to himself, almost like a ghost from his own past, "I still remember that night." That night, the night everything began to fall apart, had started like any other ordinary evening. David had just come home from his small construction workshop. He wasn't rich, but he was proud of what he built with his own two hands. Years ago, he started the workshop after losing his wife in a car accident. Since then, everything he did was for Emily. Every nail he hammered, every brick he lifted, every extra hour he worked late, it was all for her future. When she was little, Emily used to wait for him outside the shop, her tiny hands clutching her school bag, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Daddy, let's get ice cream," she'd say, and no matter how tired David was, he never said no. Those were the golden days. But golden days don't last forever. As Emily grew older, things began to change. The laughter slowly faded from their small home. Her voice, once full of love and stories from school, turned cold and distant. She began spending more time with friends from college, rich friends, with shiny cars and expensive clothes. David didn't mind, he wanted her to enjoy life. But deep inside, he noticed how she stopped inviting him to her school events, how she avoided introducing him to her friends. Still, he believed it was just a phase. She was growing up, finding her own world. Until that one night. It was winter, and the air was cold enough to make his fingers ache. David was sitting at the kitchen table, going through bills, when Emily came home. She looked different, elegant, mature, but her eyes didn't meet his. She hesitated before speaking. "Dad, I have something to tell you," she said, her voice low but steady. David smiled, unaware of the storm that was about to come. "What is it, sweetheart?" She took a deep breath. "I'm getting married." For a moment, David's heart stopped. Then a warm smile spread across his face. "Married? That's wonderful, Emily. Who's the lucky guy?" "His name is Ryan Clark," she said. "He's from New York. He owns a company." David's smile wavered just a little. He had heard that name before, Clark Construction, one of the biggest companies in the city. People like them didn't live in the same world as him. Still, he wanted to be happy for her. "That's great, sweetheart. When do I get to meet him?" Emily looked away. "Dad, about that." Her silence said everything. David felt a strange chill crawl down his spine. "He doesn't know much about you," she finally said, her voice small. "I mean, he knows I don't really have family." David blinked, not sure he heard right. "What do you mean? You don't have family?" "Emily, I'm right here." "I know, Dad," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "It's just, his family is different. They're very classy. I didn't want them to judge me because of where I came from. I didn't want them to think less of me." Her words cut deeper than any knife could. For years, he had worked himself to the bone for her future, and now she was ashamed of him. David tried to speak, but his voice trembled. "You're ashamed of me?" Emily shook her head quickly. "No, no. It's not like that. I want this wedding to be perfect. Please, Dad, just understand. Maybe it's better if you don't come. At least for now." Her words echoed in the silence of that small kitchen. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just nodded slowly, as if the life inside him had quietly walked away. "If that's what you want," he said softly, his voice breaking. She reached out as if to touch his hand, but she couldn't. "I'm sorry," she whispered before walking away. That night, David sat alone by the window, staring at the empty street. The wind howled outside, and the house creaked with loneliness. He whispered again, "I still remember that night, because it was the night his heart broke, piece by piece." Days turned into weeks. The invitations came, but not for him. David wasn't mentioned anywhere. Neighbors talked about the big wedding, the Miller's girl marrying the Clark boy. Can you believe it? But no one noticed the father who wasn't invited. David didn't want revenge. He didn't want pity. He only wanted to see her happy. So he did what he always did, he worked. Quietly, steadily, without complaint. Then one morning, a letter arrived. It was from the Clark family wedding planner. It wasn't addressed to him personally, but it had his name on the invoice. The letter was polite but firm. "Dear Mr. Miller, as per your previous agreement for the venue advance, we are requesting the remaining balance of $180,000 to complete the wedding preparations." David stared at the letter, confused. Agreement? Balance? $180,000? He went through the papers again and found something else, copies of transactions, contracts, even his company's logo printed on one of the documents. He realized what it meant. Emily had used his company's name to pay for parts of her wedding. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe a misunderstanding. But then he saw her signature, Emily Miller, written right under his company's name. David felt the air leave his chest. She had used his savings, the money he had been building for years, for his retirement, for her future. He called her. Once. Twice. No answer. On the third call, she finally picked up. "Emily, what is this?" His voice was shaking. "These bills, they're from your wedding. Why is my company paying for them?" "Dad, please, it's complicated," she said quickly. "Ryan's family wanted a certain kind of wedding. I didn't have the full amount. I thought I'd return it after the wedding, I swear." "You thought you'd return it?" David's voice broke. "Emily, that's my life's work. You can't just—" "Dad, please don't make this harder," she interrupted. "You wouldn't understand how things work at that level. I'll pay you back once we settle." Then she hung up. David sat in silence, staring at the phone. The only sound was the ticking clock on the wall. He realized then that he was no longer part of her world, not even in her mistakes. The next few weeks passed like a blur. The day of the wedding arrived, and David stood outside the massive glass hall, watching from a distance. The place glowed with lights and laughter. Expensive cars lined the road, photographers rushed everywhere, and in the center of it all stood Emily, dressed like a princess, smiling beside her husband. No one noticed the man standing far away in a cheap gray suit, clutching a small gift box in his hands. Inside was a locket, her mother's locket, the same one she wore on her first day of school. He wanted to walk inside, to see her, to give her the locket. But he stopped when he heard someone ask, "Who's that man at the gate?" And another voice answered, "Oh, just some worker, maybe from the catering team." That's when he turned away. He didn't see the ceremony. He didn't see her walk down the aisle. He just walked home, the sound of music fading behind him. That night, when he reached his small home, the silence felt heavier than ever. He placed the locket back in its box and kept it in the drawer beside his bed. He whispered again, "I still remember that night." But this time, his voice carried anger. Because something had changed inside him. He realized that love, no matter how pure, cannot survive without respect. He had been silent too long. He had been invisible for too long. The next morning, he went to his office, opened the files, and looked at the wedding bills again. The total was shocking, $300,000. Every penny was paid from his business account. His company was drowning, and she didn't even know. He sat there for a long time, staring at the numbers. Then slowly, he smiled, a quiet, sad smile. "Maybe it's time she remembers who I am," he said. And that's when he printed the final invoice, $300,000 due immediately, and signed it with his own name, David Miller. He folded the papers neatly, placed them in an envelope, and wrote the address, Mr. and Mrs. Ryan Clark. As he sealed the envelope, he whispered under his breath, "You may have disowned me, Emily, but this time, you won't forget me." He placed the letter on his desk, turned off the light, and walked out into the cold night. Outside, the wind carried a strange calm, the kind that comes right before a storm. The morning sun rose slowly over the Clark mansion, shining through the tall glass windows and across the expensive white marble floors. The place looked like something out of a dream, golden chandeliers, silver mirrors, and everything too perfect to be real. Emily Clark, now newly married, sat at the breakfast table dressed in a silk robe, sipping her coffee. The smile on her face hadn't left since the wedding. Everything had gone exactly as she imagined. The guests had praised the decorations, her dress had been the talk of the evening, and her husband, Ryan, had looked like a prince beside her. For Emily, it was the start of a new life, a life far away from her past, far away from the small house on Willow Street and the man she once called Dad. She had told herself again and again that she wasn't cruel, she was practical. She didn't want people to judge her by her father's rough hands or his simple clothes. She had spent her whole life climbing out of that small-town shadow, and now, she was finally free. That morning, while she scrolled through her wedding pictures on her phone, Ryan walked in, holding a thick white envelope. "This came in the mail for you," he said, placing it on the table. "From someone named David Miller." For a second, her hand froze. Her heart skipped a beat. David Miller. She stared at the envelope, her mind spinning. Her father's name looked so cold, written in black ink. She forced a small laugh. "Probably just some old business thing," she said quickly, avoiding his eyes. "I'll check it later." Ryan shrugged and went back upstairs, unaware of the storm that was about to begin. Emily waited until he was gone, then slowly opened the envelope. Inside were several printed pages, invoices, receipts, and at the very top, a single letter written in her father's simple handwriting. To Mr. and Mrs. Ryan Clark. "I hope this letter finds you both well. As you are aware, the total cost for the wedding arrangements made under Miller Construction comes to $300,000. Kindly clear the payment within 30 days. Regards, David Miller." Emily's hands trembled. Her eyes scanned the words again and again. There it was, her father's company name, his signature, and the number, $300,000. She could almost hear his voice in her head, calm and firm, "You may have disowned me, Emily, but this time, you won't forget me." Her chest tightened with panic. She quickly flipped through the other papers, everything was real. Every transaction she had made using his business name, every payment for the wedding, every single bill. It was all there, undeniable proof. Her mind raced. What if Ryan saw this? What if his family found out? Her hands shook as she gathered the papers and stuffed them back into the envelope. Her heart was beating fast, her breathing uneven. She felt as if the walls of the perfect mansion were slowly closing in on her. Just then, Ryan returned. "What's that about?" he asked casually, pouring himself some coffee. "Nothing," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just some confusion with a vendor." "I'll handle it." He nodded and kissed her forehead. "Good. I have a meeting in an hour. Don't stress about little things today, okay?" As soon as he left, Emily grabbed her phone and dialed her father's number. He picked up after the second ring. His voice was calm, steady, too calm. "Hello, Emily." "Dad." What is this? She hissed, her voice sharp with panic. You sent a bill to my house? Are you trying to humiliate me? David's voice was quiet. I sent a bill for what you owe. Nothing more, nothing less. You can't do that, she snapped. Ryan doesn't know about this. His family doesn't know about this. Do you have any idea what could happen if they find out? I know exactly what could happen, he said slowly. You took my company's money, Emily. You used my name. That's called theft. I didn't raise you to be that kind of person. Her throat tightened. I told you I'd pay you back. I just needed time. You didn't ask for time, David replied. You didn't ask for anything. You just erased me. There was silence on both ends of the line. Emily's hands were shaking. She had never heard her father speak like that before, not angry, not cruel, just tired. Dad, please, she whispered. Don't do this. I'll come see you tomorrow. We can talk. David sighed. There's nothing to talk about. You have 30 days. After that, the matter goes to court. Before she could say another word, he hung up. Emily stared at her phone, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time, she felt fear, not of her father, but of the truth catching up to her. That evening, when Ryan returned home, she tried her best to act normal. But he noticed her silence. You okay? He asked. You seem a bit off. I'm fine, she lied, forcing a smile. Just tired from the wedding stress. But that night, when he went to bed, she sat alone in the living room, staring at the envelope again. She knew she couldn't let this destroy everything she had built. She had worked too hard, fought too long to reach this life. So she came up with a plan. The next morning, she drove to her father's house. It had been months since she'd last been there. The sight of it brought back a flood of memories, her childhood swing in the front yard, the old oak tree her mother loved, the wooden porch that still creaked under her feet. Everything looked smaller now, older, or maybe she was just too used to big things now. David was in the workshop, fixing an old chair when she walked in. He didn't look up at first. You found the place, he said, his voice flat. Dad, please, she started, stepping closer. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted a good life. I didn't want to be judged. David looked at her then, his eyes calm but filled with pain. You wanted a good life, and I wanted you to have it. But a good life built on lies doesn't last long, Emily. I'll pay you back, she said quickly. Just give me some time. Ryan's business is doing well. I'll transfer the money in a few months. David shook his head. You already had years, Emily. I worked every day for that money. I built my company from nothing. You took it without asking, and then you told the world you didn't even know me. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean it like that. I just... He raised his hand gently. Stop. For a long moment, there was silence. Then he said, You think money can fix everything. But sometimes, it's not about the money. It's about respect. Emily's voice broke. So what do you want? You want to ruin my life? You want Ryan to hate me? David looked at her sadly. No. I just want you to take responsibility. I want you to face the truth. Her face hardened. Fine, she said bitterly. Do whatever you want. Send your bill. Send your lawyer. But don't ever expect me to come back here again. She turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. David stood still, staring at the door long after she left. Then he whispered to himself, You already left a long time ago, Emily. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind racing. The next morning, Ryan found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the letter again. "What's that?" he asked, noticing the envelope. Before she could hide it, he picked it up and started reading. His expression changed from confusion to disbelief. $300,000? Emily, what is this? Her voice trembled. It's nothing. It's a misunderstanding. He frowned. This is from your father. You told me you didn't have a father. Her world froze. Ryan, please, let me explain. But he stepped back. You lied to me? You told me your parents were dead. What is this? Tears rolled down her cheeks. I just didn't want you to think I came from nothing. Ryan's voice turned cold. You lied to me, and you used stolen money for our wedding? Please, Ryan, I'll fix it. I'll pay him back. He shook his head, anger flashing in his eyes. No, Emily. You can't fix something like this with money. He threw the letter on the table and walked out of the room. Emily fell to her knees, sobbing. The walls of her perfect world were finally cracking. Everything she tried to hide was coming out, piece by piece. That night, she called her father again, but this time, he didn't answer. She called again. And again. But there was only silence. Finally, she sent him a message. Dad, please. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I'll come tomorrow. But when she drove to his house the next morning, the workshop was empty. The door was locked, the windows closed. On the front porch, she found another envelope. Her name was written on it, Emily Clark. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single note. The amount you owe is not just money. It's everything I ever gave you, my love, my trust, my name. I don't need your apology. I need you to understand what it cost me. David. Her heart broke as she read it. And for the first time, she realized the real debt she owed wasn't $300,000. It was something far greater, something she might never be able to repay. As she stood there on the porch, the wind blew the note from her hand, carrying it across the empty street. She ran after it, but it slipped away, just like her father had. And in that cold morning silence, Emily understood that the story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes, the hardest part isn't losing someone. It's knowing they've already given up on you. For days after receiving her father's final note, Emily felt like her world had gone completely silent. The grand house that once felt like a palace now seemed empty, too big, too cold, and too quiet. Every time she walked down the long hallway, her footsteps echoed like reminders of what she had lost. Ryan had stopped talking to her. He left early for work and came home late, barely looking at her. When he did, his eyes no longer held the warmth she had fallen in love with. They were cold, sharp, and distant. Each night, Emily sat alone at the dining table, staring at her untouched food. She thought about her father's letter again and again. The amount you owe is not just money. It's everything I ever gave you, my love, my trust, my name. Those words burned in her mind like a scar she couldn't erase. One night, she tried calling him again. She needed to hear his voice. She needed him to know she was sorry, truly sorry this time. But once again, there was no answer. Only the sound of the dial tone. The next morning, she drove to Willow Street. The drive was long, the air outside gray with early winter fog. When she reached her father's house, the place looked lifeless. The yard was overgrown, the windows covered with dust, and the front door locked. She knocked and called his name again and again, but there was no reply. A neighbor, an old woman named Mrs. Turner, came out from across the street. She looked at Emily with tired eyes. He left last week, she said softly. Emily froze. Left? Where did he go? Mrs. Turner shrugged. Didn't say. Just packed his tools in some boxes, locked up, and left. He said he needed a new start somewhere far away. Emily's heart sank. Did he leave any address? A number? The old woman shook her head. No, dear. But he looked different. Quiet, but not sad. Like a man who finally made peace with something. Emily stood there for a long moment, staring at the small house that once held all her childhood memories. The swing her father built was broken now, the ropes frayed. The paint on the porch was peeling. Everything looked forgotten, just like she had made him feel. When she finally got back to her car, she sat inside and broke down crying. The guilt inside her was too heavy to carry. For years, she had tried to climb above her past, but now it felt like her past had climbed back to crush her. Back at the mansion, Ryan was waiting in the living room. He stood when she entered. "Where were you?" he asked coldly. "I went to see my father," she said quietly. "He's gone. He left town." Ryan crossed his arms. "Good. Maybe that means this nightmare is finally over." She looked at him in disbelief. "Nightmare?" "He's my father, Ryan." "Your father," Ryan said bitterly, "sent me a legal notice this morning." "Did you know that?" Emily's blood ran cold. "What?" He handed her a document. It was from a law firm, Miller and Associates. It was a formal demand notice stating that the $300,000 must be paid within 15 days or legal action would be taken. Emily's voice trembled. He wouldn't really do that." Ryan's eyes hardened. "He already did. And you know what? I can't even blame him. You lied to me, you stole from him, and you dragged me into it. Do you even understand what kind of mess we're in?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Ryan, please, I'll fix this. I promise." He shook his head. "No, Emily. You can't fix something that's broken beyond repair. You should have told me the truth before the wedding." Her voice broke. "I was scared you wouldn't love me if you knew where I came from." Ryan's reply was sharp and cold. "And now I don't." Those words hit her harder than any slap. She stood frozen as he walked past her, grabbed his keys, and left. The sound of the car engine faded, leaving behind only silence again, that same heavy silence that now followed her everywhere. That night, Emily sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by papers, bills, and old photos. Her eyes fell on one picture, her father holding her when she was a little girl, both of them smiling at the camera. The photo was slightly torn, but their happiness was still there, frozen in time. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. I really am." Then, suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was an email from her father's lawyer. The message was short and formal. "Dear Mrs. Clark, Mr. David Miller has instructed us to begin liquidation of Miller Construction due to unpaid debts caused by unauthorized expenses. Please note that any remaining assets, including the company property, will be sold within 14 days to cover outstanding costs. Regards, Miller and Associates." Emily stared at the screen in shock. "Liquidation?" she whispered. Her father was selling his company, the company he built with his own hands, because of her? She jumped up and grabbed her car keys. She couldn't let this happen. She had to stop him. She had to see him, wherever he was. She drove through the night, trying to remember every place he might have gone. Old construction sites, small towns nearby, motels, anywhere he could have stayed. It was almost midnight when she stopped at a small gas station on the outskirts of the city. The cold air bit at her skin as she stepped out to ask the cashier. "Excuse me," she said, "have you seen a man named David Miller? Tall, gray hair, works with wood, maybe drives an old blue truck?" The cashier thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah. He stopped here a few days ago. bought gas and some coffee. Said he was heading toward Riverside County. There's an old workshop there near the woods. Her heart jumped. Thank you, she said quickly, rushing back to her car. As she drove through the dark road toward Riverside, the trees thickened and the night grew darker. The headlights of her car cut through the fog, but barely. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. She was afraid, not of the road, but of what she might find. Finally, after nearly an hour, she saw a small sign by the road, Riverside Woodworks. Her father's truck was parked outside. She stopped the car and stepped out. The cold wind rustled the leaves. A single light was on inside the workshop. She could hear the faint sound of hammering. She walked slowly toward the door. Through the small glass window, she saw him, David, working quietly, shaping a piece of wood. His hands moved with calm, steady rhythm. His face looked older, more tired, but peaceful. For a moment, she just stood there watching him. The man she had once thought of as ordinary now looked extraordinary, a man who had carried so much pain but never let it destroy him. Finally, she knocked on the door. David looked up, surprised. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he put down his tools and opened the door. Emily, he said softly. Dad, she whispered, tears already in her eyes. I found you. He didn't smile. You shouldn't be here. I had to come, she said, stepping closer. I read about the company. You're selling everything. Please don't do this. It's my fault. I'll fix it. I'll get the money. David shook his head slowly. It's too late, Emily. The company is gone. It was never about the money. Then what is it about? She cried. Why are you doing this? He looked at her for a long time before answering. Because I can't build new things with old pain. I built everything in my life for you, but I forgot to build something for myself. Maybe it's time I start over. Her heart broke all over again. Dad, please. Don't shut me out. I know I hurt you, but I can change. I can be better. David sighed deeply. I want to believe that, Emily. But sometimes, love needs distance to heal. She stepped closer. I don't want distance. I want my father back. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, there was a small softness in his eyes. Then prove it, he said quietly. Prove to me that you can face what you've done. Go back to your life, tell the truth to Ryan, pay what you owe, and stand on your own. Then come back. Emily wiped her tears. And if I do that? Then, he said, maybe we can start again. She nodded slowly, her chest tight with emotion. She turned to leave, but as she reached the door, David said one more thing. Emily, he said softly, you may have forgotten who I was for a while, but I never forgot who you were. Her eyes filled with tears again. I'll make it right, she whispered. When she stepped outside, the wind was cold, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe she could fix what she broke. As she got into her car and drove away, she didn't notice the black car parked a few yards away, a man sitting inside, watching the workshop with a serious expression. It wasn't Ryan. It was someone else, someone David had once worked with. And in his hand was a document with David's name on it, one that could change everything again. The storm wasn't over yet. Days passed after the wedding, but Richard could not find peace. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma's face, smiling, laughing, pretending he was no one. The pain was deep and heavy, sitting in his chest like a stone. The sound of music from that night still echoed in his head, but instead of joy, it only brought him emptiness. He kept asking himself what he had done wrong. Had he been a bad father? Had he failed to love her enough? The questions had no answers, and that made it even worse. He tried to move on with his life, but the silence from Emma was unbearable. Not a single call. Not a single message. Not even a thank you. He had paid for everything, the food, the decorations, the luxury cars, the designer dress. It had cost him everything he had saved over the years. He had worked extra hours, sold his car, and even taken a loan to make her dream wedding possible. And now she was gone, as if he never existed. One afternoon, Richard sat in his small living room, the wedding album lying open on the table. He stared at the pictures. In every photo, Emma looked happy, but she had made sure he was never in any of them. The photographers had been told not to capture him. His hands trembled as he turned each page. It was like looking through someone else's life, a stranger's celebration. The phone rang suddenly, breaking the silence. It was Mark, Emma's husband. Richard hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," he said quietly. "Hey, Richard," Mark's voice came through, calm and polite. "I hope you're doing well." Richard's heart pounded. "I'm fine," he replied. "Is everything okay?" "Well," Mark began slowly, "we just wanted to ask if you could help with some extra payments. There were some leftover expenses from the wedding. The hotel added some charges." Richard froze. "What?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "I already paid everything. The total was $300,000. You know that." "Yes," Mark said quickly, "but the management added new fees. It's not much, maybe 10,000 more." Richard felt anger rise inside him. "You want me to pay more? After your wife pretended I was no one at her wedding," he said, his voice shaking. Mark went silent. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Richard, please understand. Emma didn't mean to hurt you. It was just complicated." Richard laughed bitterly. "Complicated? She told people I wasn't her father." The line went quiet. Then Mark said in a low tone, "Maybe it's better if you don't call her for a while. She needs time." Richard couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Time? I gave her my life," he shouted, slamming the phone down. He sat in silence for a long time after that. The house felt emptier than ever. He looked around, every corner reminded him of her. The little drawings she made as a child, the piano she used to play, the photo of her first day at school. Everything was still there, but she was gone. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He walked outside, feeling the cold air brush against his face. The moon was bright, but his heart felt dark. He thought about all the times he had sacrificed for her, skipping vacations, selling his watch, working overtime. He had believed he was building her future, but in the end, she had erased him from it. The next morning, Richard decided to visit the hotel manager. He wanted to see all the bills himself. When he arrived, the staff recognized him immediately. "Ah, Mr. Lewis," the manager said, greeting him warmly. "The father of the bride. It was a beautiful wedding." Richard forced a smile. "Yes, it was. I just need to check the final balance. I think there's been a mistake." The manager nodded and handed him the papers. Richard sat down, scanning through the pages. As he went through the details, he noticed something strange. Several items were listed under bride's request that he had never approved. Custom lighting, imported flowers, extra rooms for guests, and even a diamond decoration on the cake stand. His heart sank. All these things had been added quietly, one by one. No one had told him. And now, they were asking him to pay for it. He looked up, his voice low but firm. "Who approved these expenses?" The manager looked a little nervous. Mrs. Emma," he said. "She told us her father had agreed." Richard felt the world spin. She had used his name to get more. He had trusted her completely, and she had taken advantage of him. His hands clenched around the papers, his jaw tight with anger. He thanked the manager and walked out. His steps were slow, heavy. The betrayal cut deeper than before. It wasn't just that she had disowned him, she had lied to him, used him, and thrown him away. Back home, Richard sat in front of his old computer. He opened a blank document and began typing a letter. Every word came from the pain in his heart. He wrote down every detail of the wedding costs, every payment, every invoice. At the top, he wrote in bold letters, "Final bill, $300,000 due." When he was done, he read the letter again. His hands shook as he printed it. He placed the paper in an envelope and stared at it for a long moment. It felt strange, like he was sending away years of love and trust. But he knew it had to be done. He whispered to himself, "If she wanted to forget who I am, let her remember the price of it." The next morning, he mailed the envelope to Emma's address. He didn't add any note. Just the bill. Just the truth. Then he sat back and waited. Days turned into weeks. There was no reply. No call. But one evening, as the sun was setting, he heard a car pull up outside his house. His heart raced as he looked through the window. It was her. Emma stepped out, dressed in a simple coat. Her face was pale, her eyes uncertain. She walked up to the door slowly, almost hesitating. Richard's hands trembled as he opened the door. "Dad," she whispered, her voice soft, almost breaking. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, waiting. "I got your letter," she said, tears forming in her eyes. "I didn't think you'd actually send it." He stared at her, his face calm but his heart burning. "I didn't think you'd forget me either," he said quietly. She looked down, ashamed. I didn't mean for things to go that way," Mark said. "Stop," Richard interrupted. "I don't want to hear excuses. You made your choice that day." There was silence between them, the kind that carried years of love and pain. Then she whispered, "Can we talk?" Richard looked at her for a long moment before stepping aside. "Come in," he said. She entered the house, her eyes scanning the walls filled with pictures she hadn't looked at in years. She sat on the couch, her hands trembling. "Dad," she said softly, "I didn't mean to hurt you. I wanted to fit in with Mark's family. They said you wouldn't understand our lifestyle. They said you'd embarrass me." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "Embarrass you? I gave you everything I had." Her tears fell freely now. "I know," she said, her voice cracking. "And I hate myself for what I did." For a moment, there was silence, just the sound of the old clock ticking on the wall. Then Richard stood up, walked to the table, and picked up a small folder. He placed it in front of her. "These are all the bills," he said. "Every dollar I spent. Look at them. This is what love cost me." Emma opened the folder with shaking hands. Her face went pale as she flipped through the pages. 300,000, she whispered in shock. "Yes," Richard said. "That's the price of your dream." She covered her face, crying quietly. Richard felt his heart soften, but he didn't speak. He just watched her, silently hoping she would finally understand. But just as he thought she might apologize, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, then stood up. "I have to go," she said quickly. "Mark's waiting." Richard stared at her in disbelief. "That's it?" he asked. "You came here, saw the truth, and you're leaving?" She hesitated for a second, her eyes full of confusion. "I'll call you, Dad. I promise." And then she walked out. Richard stood there, staring at the open door, feeling the cold wind blow inside. He realized then that maybe she would never change. Maybe the daughter he had raised was gone forever. But as the sound of her car faded away, something inside him told him that this wasn't the end. The real storm was yet to come. After that evening, Richard's house once again fell into silence. The air inside felt heavy, thick with words that were never said. He replayed every moment of Emma's visit, her tears, her voice, the way she left without looking back. It was like reopening an old wound that refused to heal. For the first time in his life, he began to realize that love, no matter how deep, could break a person completely. The following days moved slowly. Every sunrise looked the same, dull, colorless, empty. Richard spent most of his time sitting by the window, staring at the road, waiting for something that never came. Emma never called. Not a single message. Not even a simple thank you. The promise she made before walking out that door vanished like smoke. One night, as the rain poured outside, Richard sat alone at the table. The folder of bills still lay there, untouched since Emma's visit. He looked at it, thinking about the years of sacrifices hidden behind every number. The overtime shifts, the missed meals, the broken back, all turned into paper and ink. His chest ached as memories of little Emma flooded back, the girl who used to run into his arms after school, the one who promised she'd always take care of him when he got old. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Where did that little girl go?" The sound of thunder echoed through the house, and then his phone buzzed on the table. For a moment, his heart skipped a beat, maybe it was her. He picked up the phone quickly, but it wasn't Emma. It was an unknown number. "Hello," he said, trying to sound calm. A woman's voice answered, "Is this Mr. Richard Lewis?" "Yes, who's speaking?" "This is Angela from Crestview Law Firm," she said. "We're calling regarding a financial claim related to your daughter's wedding event." Richard frowned. "A claim?" "Yes, sir. We received a notice from the hotel stating there's still an unpaid balance of $10,000. It's been assigned to your name as the guarantor." His hands went cold. "What? No, that's impossible. I paid everything." "I understand, sir," Angela replied softly. "But it seems your daughter added extra services after your approval. According to the signed documents, you are listed as the responsible party." Richard felt his chest tighten. "Can I see those papers?" "Yes, sir. We'll send them to your email today." When the call ended, he sat frozen in disbelief. She had signed his name. His own daughter had forged his signature. Later that night, the documents arrived in his inbox. He opened them, and there it was, his name written neatly, but not by his hand. He recognized the difference immediately. The smooth curve of the letters, the careful shape, it wasn't his. It was hers. Emma's handwriting. His eyes burned as he stared at it. He whispered, "Why would you do this to me, Emma?" The rain outside turned heavier, tapping on the window like tiny reminders of his pain. Richard leaned back in his chair, his head throbbing. His mind swirled between anger and sadness. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. All those years of love, care, and sacrifice, reduced to betrayal and lies. The next morning, he decided to confront her again. He couldn't let this go. He deserved answers. He drove to her house, a big, modern place in the city. The kind of house built with pride, money, and image. When he reached the gate, a guard stopped him. "Sir, do you have an appointment?" the guard asked. "I'm her father," Richard replied. "Emma Lewis." The guard hesitated, then made a quick call. After a moment, he said politely, "I'm sorry, sir. Mrs. Lewis is not available. She asked not to be disturbed." Richard felt his throat tighten. "Tell her it's urgent." But the guard only shook his head. "I can't, sir. Please leave." Richard stood there, staring at the tall iron gates that separated him from his own daughter. He wanted to shout, to force his way in, but he knew it would only make things worse. Finally, he turned around and walked back to his car, his eyes wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. As he drove away, memories filled his mind again. He remembered her laughter, her small hand holding his as a child, her dreams of a perfect life. He had given her everything to make that life possible, but she had chosen to erase him from it. That evening, as he sat in his living room, a strange calm came over him. The pain was still there, but now it was mixed with something stronger, resolve. He opened his laptop and began to type again. This time, it wasn't a bill. It was a letter. Dear Emma, he began, you may have forgotten who helped you build your dreams, but I haven't forgotten what love costs. You took my trust and turned it into a receipt. You signed my name when I wasn't there, and you shut the door when I came. But one day, the truth always finds its way home. He paused for a moment, his eyes blurring. Then he continued. I raised you to be honest, to be kind, to be strong. But I guess somewhere along the road, you learned to wear masks instead. Maybe money blinded you. Maybe pride did. But the world has a strange way of reminding us where we came from. He printed the letter and placed it with a copy of the forged documents inside an envelope. On the front, he wrote her name. But this time, he didn't plan to mail it. He had another idea. The next morning, he went back to the hotel where the wedding had taken place. He asked to see the manager again and showed him the papers. These signatures, he said quietly, were not mine. You've been lied to. The manager looked shocked. Mr. Lewis, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. Richard nodded slowly. I understand. But you should know the truth. He left the letter with them and walked out, feeling a small sense of relief. For the first time, he wasn't hiding behind his pain anymore. He was standing up for himself, not as a father, but as a man who had been wronged. That evening, as he returned home, the phone rang again. It was an unknown number, but he answered anyway. Dad, the voice on the other end said softly. It was Emma. Richard's heart stopped for a moment. Emma, he whispered. I heard what you did, she said quietly. The hotel called. They told me you showed them the papers. Yes, Richard replied. Because they needed to know the truth. There was silence. Then she said in a trembling voice, Why are you doing this? You're ruining everything. He took a deep breath. No, Emma. I'm not ruining anything. I'm just finally standing up for myself. She didn't reply. The silence stretched for several seconds before she whispered, You don't understand, Dad. You're going to destroy my life. Richard's voice was calm but cold. You destroyed mine the day you said you didn't know me. Then he hung up. For a long time, he sat there staring at the phone, his chest heavy but his mind strangely clear. He didn't know what would happen next, whether she'd fight back or apologize, but he knew one thing for certain, the truth was finally out. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky again, louder this time. It was as if the heavens themselves were warning him that the real storm was still coming. And deep inside, Richard felt it too. Something big was about to happen, something that would change both their lives forever. The night after Richard hung up on Emma, sleep didn't come easy. His mind spun like a restless machine, faces, memories, voices, all tangled together in a storm of regret and exhaustion. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2. He just sat there, staring at the faint reflection of himself in the window. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened with leftover drops, glowing faintly under the yellow streetlights. He whispered to himself, What did I ever do to deserve this? The answer didn't come. Only silence filled the room. For days after that call, Richard heard nothing from Emma. But whispers began to spread. Neighbors who had attended the wedding started talking, quiet, pitying voices that reached his ears through the small-town gossip chain. They said Emma and Mark were in trouble. That their new home was up for sale. that the marriage wasn't as perfect as it looked. At first, Richard didn't believe it. But then one morning, he received a message from an unknown number. It was a photo, his daughter's wedding picture being taken down from a newspaper article with the headline, "Mark and Emma Lewis face financial lawsuit over wedding expenses." He froze. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the text that came with the image. "You may want to check the local business news, Mr. Lewis." Richard opened his laptop and searched online. There it was, plain and clear. Mark's business had gone bankrupt. The luxury cars, the mansion, the parties, everything was built on borrowed money. And the $300,000 wedding had been the final push that broke it all. Richard leaned back, letting the truth sink in. For the first time in months, he didn't feel anger, only sadness. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. He had warned her silently through that bill, through his words, through his pain. But she had chosen pride. That afternoon, he received another call. This time, it was Emma's voice again, weak, trembling, almost unrecognizable. "Dad," she said softly. "Can I come over?" He didn't answer for a long moment. Then finally, he said, "Yes." An hour later, her car pulled up in front of his old house. It wasn't the shiny luxury car from before. It was a small, beaten-up sedan. She stepped out slowly, her hair tied back, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked smaller than he remembered, fragile, as if life had stripped away all her pride. When she entered, the house smelled faintly of tea and old wood. She sat down on the couch where she had cried weeks before. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "So," he said quietly, "you've seen what happens when you build your life on lies." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know," she whispered. "Everything's gone, Dad. The house, the money, even Mark." Richard looked up slowly. "What do you mean?" "He left," she said, her voice shaking. "When the news came out, he disappeared. He took what was left of our savings and ran. I don't even know where he is." She broke down completely, covering her face with her hands. Richard felt his chest ache, but he stayed still. He had imagined this moment, the day she would return broken and lost, but it didn't feel satisfying. There was no joy in seeing her hurt. Only sadness. After a while, she looked up at him again, her eyes red. "I came here because I didn't know where else to go," she said. "I'm sorry, Dad. For everything. I was stupid. I thought pretending not to know you would make me look better. I thought it would make Mark's family respect me. But it only made me lose the one person who truly loved me." Richard listened quietly, his eyes soft but unreadable. "You lied to me, Emma," he said slowly. "You used my name, my money, my trust. And for what? To please people who never cared about you?" She nodded, crying harder. "I know. I was blind. I didn't realize how much I hurt you until I saw that bill. It wasn't about the money, it was about me forgetting where I came from." He stood up, walked over to the window, and looked outside. The sky was turning gray again, clouds gathering like an omen. "I raised you to be honest," he said. "To know the value of hard work. But you wanted to skip the struggle, didn't you?" She didn't respond. Her sobs filled the silence. Richard turned back, his face calm but his eyes sharp. "What do you want from me now, Emma?" She swallowed hard. "I just need time. A place to stay for a while. I'll find a job. I'll fix things." He stared at her for a long time. Then he sighed deeply and nodded. "The guest room is still the same. You can stay. But I want you to understand something, forgiveness doesn't erase the past. You'll have to earn it." Her face lit with relief, and she nodded quickly. "I will, Dad." I promise. For the next few days, Emma stayed in the small house. The first morning, Richard saw her wake up early, quietly cleaning the kitchen, washing the dishes, making tea for both of them, things she hadn't done since she was a teenager. She barely spoke, but her actions spoke for her. At night, Richard found her sitting by the window, looking out into the dark street, lost in thought. He wanted to comfort her, but part of him still held back. The wound was too deep. One evening, while they were having dinner, Emma finally asked, "Dad, are you ever going to forgive me?" Richard looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "Forgiveness isn't a word, Emma. It's a change I need to see in you. And that takes time." She nodded slowly, understanding. For a few weeks, things seemed to settle. She started applying for jobs and even helped him fix the garden. It almost felt like old times, like the little girl he once knew was coming back. But then one day, while cleaning the living room, Richard found something that made his heart sink again. It was an envelope, unopened, lying under the couch. The logo on it belonged to a credit company. He opened it slowly, and his eyes widened. It was a loan statement, under his name. Another $25,000 taken out just months before the wedding. His hands shook. He checked the signature, it was the same forged one. He felt the blood drain from his face. It wasn't over. She had done it before the wedding, secretly taking loans in his name. He waited until evening, his heart pounding. When she returned from the store, he was sitting in the living room, the paper in his hand. "Emma," he said quietly, "we need to talk." She froze, seeing the letter. Her face turned pale. "Dad, I can explain." "No," he said sharply, his voice suddenly cold. "You don't get to explain this time." Tears filled her eyes again. "I didn't mean to, Dad. I was desperate. Mark said it would be paid back." Richard stood up, his voice rising. "You used my name. Again. Even before you married him. You never stopped lying." She dropped to her knees, crying. "Please, Dad, I was scared. I didn't know what else to do." But he was too hurt to listen. "You didn't just break my trust, Emma. You broke me. And now, I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." He walked past her, out the door, into the cold night air. He stood under the streetlight, breathing hard, tears slipping down his face. The world around him was silent except for the faint sound of her sobs echoing behind him. For a long moment, he stared at the dark road ahead and whispered to himself, maybe some debts are never meant to be repaid. Inside the house, Emma sat on the floor, holding the paper in her hands, shaking and crying. She knew she had gone too far this time. The damage she caused might never be undone. And as the wind howled outside, both of them knew, this was not the end. It was only the beginning of a reckoning neither of them could avoid. The night after Richard walked out of the house, a cold silence settled over everything. The clock ticked loudly, echoing through the empty rooms like a reminder of all the things that had gone wrong. Emma sat on the floor for a long time, her face buried in her hands. The letter lay open beside her, the words like sharp blades cutting through her heart. She wanted to scream, to run after her father, but shame held her down. Outside, Richard stood under the streetlight, staring at the dark road. The air smelled of wet leaves, and the sound of the wind carried faint whispers through the trees. He felt lost, tired, and hollow. Every part of him wanted to forgive his daughter, to believe she was still the little girl he had raised, but the evidence was too strong, too painful. He walked slowly toward the small park at the end of the street. It was late, and no one was there. He sat on a bench and leaned forward, his hands covering his face. The memories wouldn't stop. Emma's laughter when she was young, her first school play, her promise to always take care of him. He had lived his life for her. Every sacrifice, every dream he let go of, had been for her future. And now, she had used his name to drown herself in lies. He whispered, "What happened to us, Emma? When did love turn into debt? Back at the house, Emma gathered the papers, wiping her tears with trembling hands. She placed the letter on the table and looked around. Everything in that house held pieces of their life together: the old clock he fixed, the pictures of her childhood, the chair he used to read in every evening. It hurt to look at them now. She whispered to herself, "I destroyed everything." The next morning, Richard didn't come home. His phone went straight to voicemail. Emma waited all day, pacing the living room. By evening, she started to panic. She called hospitals, checked nearby motels, nothing. The fear in her heart grew heavier with each passing hour. By the time the sun went down, she was sitting by the window, crying quietly. "Please come back, Dad," she whispered. "Please." But Richard wasn't gone far. He had driven out of town and stopped by the old lake where he used to take Emma fishing when she was small. The water was still, reflecting the stars above. He sat there, watching the ripples on the surface. In that silence, he began to think about everything that had happened. He thought about how love could twist when pride took over, how trust could be broken by greed, and how easy it was for people to forget those who built their dreams. He wasn't angry anymore, not in the way he had been before. He was just tired. After hours of thinking, he took out his phone and opened his notes app. His fingers trembled as he typed. "Emma, if I don't come back, I want you to remember something. Money can build walls, but it can't build love. You lost your way because you thought value comes with a price tag. But real value comes from truth, from loyalty, from love that doesn't have conditions. If you want to change, start there." He stared at the message for a long time before saving it. The next morning, he drove back home. The sky was cloudy, and a light drizzle began to fall. When he opened the door, Emma was sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. The moment she saw him, she jumped to her feet. "Dad," she said, rushing toward him. "Where were you?" "I fought you." "I needed time to think," he interrupted softly. She froze, unsure of what to say. He walked past her and sat down, his face calm but tired. For a long moment, they just sat there in silence, the sound of the rain filling the room. Finally, Richard spoke. "Emma, I can't pretend nothing happened. What you did was wrong. You hurt me in ways I can't describe. But I also can't keep hating you. It's destroying both of us." Her eyes filled with tears again. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'll fix this. I'll do anything." He looked at her, his voice steady. "You can't fix the past, Emma. But you can fix yourself. That's where it begins." She nodded, sniffling. "I'll pay back everything. I don't care how long it takes." He smiled weakly. "It's not just about money. You need to rebuild your honesty. You need to learn what real strength is, not showing off, not pretending, but admitting when you've failed and standing back up." She wiped her tears and nodded. "I will, Dad. I promise." For the next few weeks, things began to change slowly. Emma got a small job at a bakery nearby. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Every morning, she woke up early, tied her hair back, and left quietly. Richard watched her go each day from the window, a small flicker of hope growing inside him. At night, she would come home tired but smiling, bringing leftover bread and stories about her day. Richard listened quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes lost in thought. Slowly, the gap between them began to close, not completely, but enough to feel like healing had begun. One evening, as they sat together, Emma placed a small envelope on the table. "This is for you," she said softly. Richard opened it and found a small stack of cash. "What's this?" he asked. "The first payment," she said, smiling faintly. "For the loan. For the wedding. For everything." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes softening. You don't have to. I do, she said firmly. Because I want to. Not to erase the past, but to show you I'm changing. Richard nodded slowly. Then maybe there's hope for us after all. For the first time in a long while, they shared a quiet dinner together without tension. It almost felt like peace. But the world wasn't done testing them yet. A few days later, Richard received a letter in the mail. It was from the same law firm, Crestview. The message was short but devastating. Dear Mr. Lewis. Following a deeper review, we have discovered several additional loans and expenses filed under your name by Mrs. Emma Lewis, totaling an additional $75,000. These charges are now under legal investigation. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. He read the letter again and again, hoping it was a mistake. But the numbers were there. The signatures. The dates, all before the wedding. His hands shook as he folded the paper. Emma was in the kitchen, humming softly as she washed the dishes. He watched her, torn between love and disbelief. Had she really done even more than she'd admitted? Or was someone framing her? He stood up slowly and walked toward her. Emma, he said quietly, holding up the letter. We need to talk. She turned, confusion flashing across her face, then fear. Dad, what is that? He placed the paper on the table. Tell me this isn't true. Her eyes darted across the words. Her lips trembled. She didn't speak. Emma, he said again, his voice cracking, please, tell me you didn't do this too. Tears filled her eyes instantly. I didn't mean to, Dad. I was scared. Mark said if we didn't take the loans, we couldn't afford the house. I thought I could handle it before you ever found out. I swear I never wanted to hurt you again. Richard took a deep breath, his heart breaking all over again. Emma, do you realize what this means? You could go to jail for this. She gasped. No, please, Dad, don't say that. I'll fix it. I'll fix everything. He looked away, tears welling in his eyes. Some things can't be fixed with promises anymore. The sound of her crying filled the room, and for the first time, Richard didn't reach out to comfort her. He just stood there, silent, heartbroken, realizing that love could survive almost anything, but trust once shattered was the hardest thing to rebuild. As the night grew darker outside, both of them sat in the quiet house, knowing the storm had come full circle, and this time, it wouldn't pass so easily. The morning light crept through the curtains, painting the walls with a dull gold hue. The air inside the house felt heavy, filled with the silence that comes after too many broken words. Emma sat by the window, her face pale, her eyes hollow. The letter from the law firm still lay on the table, its edges slightly crumpled from where her trembling fingers had held it all night. Richard hadn't spoken since the previous evening. He sat on the sofa, staring blankly at the floor. His mind was a storm, memories of laughter, betrayal, and disappointment colliding like waves in his chest. He had spent his whole life teaching Emma honesty, hard work, and compassion. Yet somehow, she had chosen a path built on lies and fear. Outside, a light rain began to fall. The tapping sound on the window was the only thing breaking the silence. Richard finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Emma, we can't keep living like this. The truth has to come out. Emma looked at him, tears already forming. Dad, please. I'll handle it. I'll pay them back, I promise. Just don't call the police. Don't let this destroy us. He looked at her, his face full of exhaustion. Emma, it already has destroyed us. But maybe we can still save what's left. She wiped her tears, her voice trembling. What do you want me to do? Tell the truth, he said softly. Go to them. Admit what you did. Don't hide behind more lies. Because every time you lie, you lose another piece of yourself. And one day, there's nothing left. Emma buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I was just scared, Dad. I didn't want to lose everything. I didn't want to disappoint you again. He stood up, walked over to her, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Emma, you didn't disappoint me by failing. You disappointed me by pretending. There's a difference. I can forgive mistakes, but I can't forgive pretending everything's fine when it isn't. For the first time in a long while, she nodded without arguing. Okay, she whispered. I'll go tomorrow. I'll tell them everything. Richard nodded slowly, his voice breaking just a little. That's my girl. That night, they didn't talk much. They just sat together quietly, sharing a simple meal. It wasn't happy, but it was peaceful, like two people standing in the ruins of a storm, knowing the worst had already passed. The next morning, Emma dressed neatly, her hair tied back, her eyes red but determined. She looked at her father as she stood by the door. Will you come with me? She asked softly. He hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. You need to do this on your own, Emma. This is your first real step forward. She took a deep breath and nodded. Okay. As she walked out into the gray morning, Richard watched from the window. He saw her disappear down the street, her figure small against the mist. He prayed silently, not for her to escape the consequences, but for her to finally find her truth. Hours passed. The house was quiet again. Richard made tea but barely drank it. His thoughts drifted to the past, to the nights he stayed up working double shifts, to the day he first held her hand as she learned to walk, to the moment she said, I'll make you proud, Dad. He smiled sadly. By the afternoon, there was a knock on the door. Richard opened it and found Emma standing there, her eyes swollen from crying but her face calm. It's done, she said softly. I told them everything. They said they'll look into it. There will be a court hearing, but they also said if I start paying it back and cooperate, they might not press full charges. Richard nodded. That's good. That's the right thing. She stepped closer, her voice shaking. Dad. I'm sorry for everything. For lying. For pretending. For hurting you. He looked at her, his eyes glistening. Emma, the hardest thing in life is facing the mess you created. But you did it. That means something. It means you're still the girl I raised. She broke down crying again, and this time, he hugged her, tight, like a father who had been holding back years of pain. I forgive you, he whispered. But don't waste this second chance. Not everyone gets one. Weeks passed. Slowly, things began to change. Emma started attending financial counseling and took another job at a small bookstore. She sold her luxury items and used the money to start paying off her debts. The process was long and hard, but for the first time, she was living honestly. Richard helped her where he could, driving her to appointments, making her tea when she came home late, and sometimes just listening quietly as she talked about her day. They didn't talk about the wedding anymore. It had become a wound they both chose to let heal naturally. One evening, as the sun set outside, Emma sat beside her father on the porch. The air was warm, and the sound of crickets filled the quiet. Dad, she said softly, I've been thinking about something. What is it? He asked. I want to pay you back for everything. Not just the money, but for the years you lost because of me. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. You don't owe me anything, Emma. You've already paid me back, by finally being honest. That's worth more than all the money in the world. She looked down, tears glimmering in her eyes. I don't deserve your forgiveness. No one does, he said gently. That's why it's called forgiveness. They sat there for a long while, watching the last light fade from the sky. For the first time in years, Richard felt peace settle in his heart. The pain wasn't gone, but it had softened into something bearable, something almost beautiful. Months later, Emma received a letter from the law firm again. This time, it wasn't a threat. It stated that because of her cooperation and consistent repayments, they were closing the case. She ran to her father, tears streaming down her face. "They closed it, Dad." "It's over," she cried, laughing and crying at the same time. Richard smiled, his eyes full of pride. "I told you, Emma. You can fix anything when you face it with truth." She hugged him tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you." He smiled and whispered, "Maybe now, we can both start living again." The days that followed were quiet and peaceful. The wounds didn't disappear, but they healed with time. Emma never forgot what her father had taught her, that love isn't measured in money, and trust isn't something you can buy. And sometimes, she would look at the old wedding photo on the shelf, the one where she had once smiled with fake happiness, and she'd remember the cost of her choices. But now, when she looked at it, it no longer filled her with guilt. It reminded her of strength, forgiveness, and a father's unshakable love. In the end, Richard and Emma rebuilt their bond slowly but truthfully. There were still scars, but they were proof of survival, not shame. And as the sun set one evening, Richard looked at his daughter and said softly, "You know, Emma, sometimes losing everything is the only way to learn what truly matters." She smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You're right, Dad. I had to lose everything to find you again." Richard nodded, his heart full. The pain, the struggle, the long road, it had all led here, to this quiet peace. He whispered, "I still remember that night at your wedding, the night you pretended not to know me. It broke me then. But now, when I think of it, I don't feel anger. I feel grateful. Because that night taught us both the value of truth." The story of pain had finally become a story of redemption. If you felt this story in your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes, the hardest lessons in life come from the people we love most, but those lessons can also bring the deepest healing.